Well, here's a rootin' tootin' stallin' pootin' twin stick shooter I never thought I'd fancy in these here parts. Here we have a unique blend of roguelite, dungeon crawling, and open world exploration that finds you on a quest to save your daughter, the girl who is the key to everything. Big surprise. Personally, my 2-year-old daughter is the key to destroying everything, but there you go. Erosion, my gaming friends, a fairly innovative and imaginative Western-themed voxel roguelite that has a pretty neat time jump mechanic where every death finds you hopping years into the future, with 3 deaths jumping a whopping 10 years. Whew. With each quest completed or ignored, along with each interaction or NPC slain, you will discover the consequences of your actions become manifest as the years progress and you come closer to finding your daughter. Yes, another roguelite, I know, but personally I can't get enough of them, probably becoming my second favorite genre after RPGs, so it makes me happy, you know. Most likely because I just don't have much time to play games these days, and it's nice to be able to do ones with little itty-bitty runs in between. So why not join me, Jarek Defiler, as we take a glimpse into the Erosion playtest. Right there. Alright, Jarek Defiler the not-so-patient gamer here with yet another roguelite to add to our collection. This one was recommended to me by my good friend Josh at GameList Plus. Go check him out, give him a subscribe, he's great. And I apologize for my more nasally voice today, at least more nasally than usual, as my daughter brought some sickness into the home and my wife and I, as well as my dad and stepmom who were visiting, are now all diseased. Yay! Anywho, developed by Plot Twist and published by Lyrical Games, Erosion is an isometric shooter with a fairly unique art style and pretty cool world. As noted in the intro, you're a cowboy whose wife was slaughtered by a mysterious gang who also kidnapped your daughter. You're tasked with finding your daughter over the course of decades with the assistance of Lady Death here. Sexy. Miss Death is in a weakened state and can only resurrect you every few years. When you die 3 times, resurrection takes 10 years. Wow. What a slacker. This is where things start to get interesting. First, you have to click that thumbs up button as well as subscribe to the channel while hitting that notification bell for future video releases. It's very important for the immersion. Much obliged. Now, when you're on the Overworld map, you're free to roam and explore to your heart's content. You'll find towns, your old farm, bunch of enemies, points of interest, and a chicken cult. Yep, you heard that right. There's a lot here, although some parts felt a bit empty given this is just an alpha playtest. There was still enough to keep me engaged, however. Some NPCs will grant you quests that may be in conflict with other NPCs, so depending on who you take sides with, it will have consequences later. For instance, there is a point where you can decide to help the chicken cult or the villagers in this town. Both want you to wipe out the other. Naturally, I sided with the chicken cult because we all have to have principles, and I wiped out all the women, children, and men of the town. Fast forward a few years after my next death, and I found that the cult moved into the town and had other quests for me. Easy peasy living squeezy. You'll have several interactions like this where your actions will result in different outcomes as the years and decades progress. It's pretty awesome and what sets Erosion apart from most other titles in the genre, you know? Fun stuff. That said, the playtest was limited, so we didn't get to see too far into our cowboy's journey, but we got a fair taste at what the time jumping mechanic entails, and it's pretty cool. I want to know and see more. Now besides that, you also have the dungeon delving aspect where you dive into this pillar and make your way through different biomes on your travels. The dungeons allow for multiple paths to get to the end, so it doesn't generally force you into one linear direction, which was nice. Like normal roguelite fashion, each run has you choosing between different weapons and items, making a build utilizing the environment, and fighting all sorts of baddies. Now, Erosion does have some limitations when it comes to your builds. Meh. Not like Risk of Rain 2 where you can just keep stacking a crazy amount of items. You have a backpack that has only so many slots but can be upgraded to hold additional items, and you're limited to only 2 weapons per run. Your default whip, and your primary weapon, which you randomly get to choose at the start of the dungeon. Given this was just a playtest, I'm not sure if that will be the same in the full release, so maybe you'll be able to have more weapons or something. No idea. For now, we just got the 2. Your arsenal will include an activatable skill, some modifiers, passives, and ammo, because yes, your primary weapon will consume ammo. You also have a normie and nerve view when looking at your inventory here. Nice little touch if you want more details on your stats, I like that. So for the most part, the gameplay loop in the dungeon is simple. Get weapon, kill bad guys, get new items, develop a build from said items, make your way to boss, rinse and repeat. Simple. Build diversity is very apparent as well. Each weapon feels very different from the next. The developers boast over 100 weapons and abilities. Now, does that mean 100 weapons and 100 abilities separately, or weapons and abilities combined being over 100? I'm not entirely sure, but I think it's leaning towards the latter, given what we see in the meta regression stage of the game. Either way, there's more than enough to keep things interesting and fun. You have items that split your bullets, repel enemies, grant more drops, bounce your bullets, and much more. The sniper rifle was my personal favorite weapon, as well as the ebony rooster, a chicken that craps bouncing eggs. You can do all sorts of builds that mix up the gameplay very well. I tried robot builds where you have these like drone things that assist you. I did electric builds to shock my enemies. I think my favorite was this build revolving around the rolling mechanic and mines. So whenever I killed an enemy, they'd drop mines, but also whenever I'd roll, it would drop mines too, as well as reload my shotgun. So the entire field of play would become this massive explosive battlefield of sexiness. Lots of fun. Unfortunately, due to the short-range nature of the build, the boss was basically a god that I can barely touch. You know, them's the breaks. Movement and combat are twin-stick shooter format, or mouse and keyboard. Both have their pros and cons. I found mouse and keyboard to be the best for me, personally. Mouse is far more precise for shooting, despite controller having aim assist. That said, the controller is definitely superior when it comes to movement, so pick your poison kind of thing. Combat is very decent for the most part. There are some issues I'll cover in the criticism section, but ultimately the controls are fine, and the enemy variety make for fun, unique engagements. Break down. The pacing ramps up rather nicely, so you start the dungeon in a slower pace that eventually ends up into bullet hell mayhem territory. But it feels organic and fluid. They did a great job in that regard. There's also some quality of life stuff that I like, such as gaining a heart when at full health gives you a temporary increase of HP rather than it simply being wasted like we see in other roguelites. And in the overworld map right outside the dungeon entrance, you have your home base, which you build up and use to unlock all the meta progression stuff. Things like HP boost, extra backpack slots to hold more items, weapon and item upgrades which come with a caveat, resource drops and whatnot are all tweaked in your home base. Again, simple. Erosion has a lot of character and personality, which I very much appreciate. This is a game with its own aesthetic and style that you don't really see in other places, even voxel games. Voxel graphics and particles allow for nearly everything in the game to be destroyed with the exception being your base, so that's pretty fun. Character models and animations are quaint and humorous, along with the dialogue and various NPCs in the overworld and dungeon, such as a little gnome vendor guy here you find who sells you items. It's a really cool aesthetic and art style that I found pleasing to the eyes and the loins. On top of that, the music is fantastic. Very westerny and cowboyish, suits the mood and themes to perfection. I hope they release a soundtrack along with the game because I would very much like to have it. Oh, and I forgot to mention, you can use automobiles as well to roam the overworld map. You get a personal one, but there's also several others littered throughout that you can steal or return to their owner for a quest. Nice things to have as the overworld map is fairly huge, and it's just a playtest so the map is limited. But in the full release, I suspect the overworld is going to be pretty huge. So yeah, pretty cool game and enjoyable playtest so far, but what about the issues I had with Erosion? What are my criticisms? For starters, the game crashes to desktop whenever I try to change it to full screen mode. No bueno. I am forced to play in windowed full screen. That said, other than that, performance was stellar. No issues with frame drops or anything else, so yeah. Key remapping for both controller and mouse and keyboard are very borked. I mean, I suck enough as it is, and this didn't help me in the slightest, I tell you what. It would combine keybinds or just keep the originals despite me changing them, so you will have two actions happening at once when pressing one key. I changed my zoom in to mouse wheel and took it off of weapon swap, yet it kept it anyway, so whenever I would try to zoom in, it would swap my weapon. Ugh. At times, some weapons force you to use certain keybinds even if you change them. For instance, on the controller, I set my right trigger to be primary fire, however, some weapons would keep it on right bumper no matter what. This would then force me to use my activatable skill whenever it was off a cooldown because it too was set to my right bumper. Ew. So weapons like the flamethrower, rooster, and Uzi would just not register my new keybinds. Very frustrating. Likewise, I changed the keybinds on mouse and keyboard for weapon swapping between my whip and primary weapon, yet it would take me 2 to 4 clicks to get it to work no matter what. This wasn't a fluke or inconsistent bug, it would happen every time I tried to change weapons. I would have to click the keys several times before it would swap. Very annoying in the heat of battle. The controller would swap weapons with just one button press, however, so yeah. Key bindings for both mouse and keyboard and controller are very janky indeed, yes. Another criticism I have is the lack of communicating information to the player. There are a lot of items and abilities in the game, but they aren't fully explained. Like, I don't know what the plus icon means on items. It doesn't tell you. They don't seem to make much a difference. When I check the stats on either, it would stay the same, so maybe the stats menu was bugged? I don't know. Things like electric or freezing items don't seem to do what you'd think either. I would have expected electric to say stun, or freezing to, well, freeze the enemy. But all they seem to do is turn them a different color and put an icon above their head. Maybe freezing slows them down a bit, but I have no idea. The game doesn't tell you, and I couldn't really tell a difference when playing, so yeah. A big miscommunication is also weapon and item upgrades. In your camp, you can use these gear thingies to upgrade all your stuff, but it's not clear what those upgrades actually do. I was attempting to max out the whip as I rather enjoy it as a weapon and love that it has no ammo, but I always only ever have the common version of the whip despite upgrading it 2 more tiers. I have no idea if the upgrades are actually doing anything. Upgrading doesn't affect the stats as far as I can tell, so yeah, no idea what's going on there. Maybe it's just a limitation of the playtest, maybe the upgrades are for possible drops during a run, maybe I'm just a moron and not seeing it, but it would be nice for the game to tell you that. Know what I mean? Yeah, you know you guys, Another lack of communication is when using the boomerang, which I consider to be one of the worst weapons in the game. It reloads. Why? I don't know, but it doesn't have an ammo identifier, so you have no idea when it needs to reload, and thus it just randomly does it, which can be detrimental mid-fight. Very odd. Speaking of ammo, I'm not a fan of having ammo in this type of roguelite. I feel it just needlessly limits the player. Most of the time it's not a huge problem, but given that drops are completely random, I have had runs where I got barely any ammo drops and just ran out halfway through the run and had to face the boss with just my whip. One of my last runs, I was using the Uzi, and I ran out of ammo before finishing the first level of the dungeon. That's pretty bad. Maybe they just wanted an excuse to force you to use the whip, I don't know. Not an impossible task, mind you, but not particularly fun one either in the long run. So yeah, wish there was no ammo as I don't think it adds anything to the experience personally. There's a lot of issues with combat and that can make things frustrating as well, like enemies get stuck on scaffoldings and upper levels of assets, and when you finally manage to kill them, because you can't shoot up so it's a pain to get the right angle to hit them, their loot will stay stuck up there so you can't collect it. This happened quite a bit and was rather frustrating. Yes. Knocking enemies off ledges will have them respawn on top of you so they just instantly hit you. This was baffling to me. Just why? Me managing to knock off an enemy off the edge of the field of play should be an instant kill, not a punishment. Makes no sense and I have no jokes to make about it because it just pisses me off. In the dungeon, you will come across these arena rooms where the exits get blocked off until you kill all the spawning enemies. These are fine for the most part, however, they will have some where you face off against a swarm of these fast-rolling enemies. These guys are a huge pain in the ass because they are very buggy. I assume it has to do with their rolling mechanic, but your projectiles will often go right through them without damaging them, especially when they're rolling away from you. So having a ton of them in an arena makes for a bad time. Not fun at all, very annoying, very not Richard Simmons of them. Hail the God King. Rolling yourself is a bit confusing at times because it's not clear on if it has invulnerability frames or not. Sometimes it feels like it does, other times it doesn't, just not sure. When things start getting really crazy with all the bullet hell sexiness, it can often be very difficult to see your cursor as well as the direction your boy of cow is facing. This is naturally a huge problem in a bullet hell setting as dodging and awareness is key. But when you have a million particles and explosions and projectiles and babies flying everywhere, you can get lost at times, man. Feels bad. Next, the boss fight has a pretty hard difficulty spike depending on your build. Sometimes I've taken it out in like 5 seconds with a sniper rifle, while other times find me fighting it for 5 minutes with no luck because my weapon just doesn't do enough damage. Stupid boomerang. Which brings me to my final criticism of combat, that of item balance. There are some weapons and items that are just blatantly better than others. Even with different combinations and whatnot, some things you'll just do better with. The sniper rifle is a good example of that. Its damage and range just make it ideal for nearly every situation outside of big groups of enemies that swarm you, but then the whip works just fine to supplement in that regard, so there's really no reason not to use the sniper rifle. On the flip side, the boomerang is just ew. I made it work, but the effort you have to put in to do so is drastic compared to the sniper rifle. It just doesn't feel good to use, and fighting the boss with it is gross. Items are no different, some are just head scratching. For instance, there's this one activatable you can get that throws out these pinball bumper thingies that you can then shoot to have your projectiles bounce around between them. Sounds fun in theory, but in practice it's very situational and silly and for the most part ineffective. The setup you have to make it work just isn't worth the trouble in my opinion. Compare that to, say, the stat boost that gives you a huge overall buff, and you go with the stat boost every single time. So yeah, lots of issues with the combat, but that's not all. When it comes to questing on the overworld map, there were a few things I think they could tweak a bit as well. My biggest issue is that you can accidentally attack the NPCs, including your supposed allies, and it will just automatically break your quest chain with them. This kept happening to me over and over with the chicken cult because I had an activatable item with a huge AoE attack that would go off when I hit another key because the key bindings are so janky that it would register the wrong clicks. So I was trying to fight an enemy outside the chicken cult camp, just to have the activatable go off against my wishes and hit a chicken cult member. They then all immediately turn chicken hostile and start chicken attacking me and thus breaking the quest chain. Chicken. This was infuriating and happened multiple times. It would be nice to have a warning or something, so if you accidentally hit them once, they'll be like, "Oi, what you on about, mate?" And if you hit them again, then they can go hostile. That way the accidents from the wonky key bindings won't just instantly break everything. Another thing with quests is there are some where you have to, say, collect the parts for your car so you can build it, but the game forces you to collect each part in a certain order rather than just going out and grabbing them however you wish. So I stumbled across one part early on, but I couldn't interact with it because the quest wanted me to get another part first. But then after getting that part, it just sent me back to collect the same part I was at in the first place. Kind of irritating and unnecessary, methinks. Should just allow the player to collect them in any order they want. One last little bug with quests is that there is an option to leave the squatters on your old farm alone or wipe them out, and depending on what you do, it will have different outcomes as the years pass. However, I would always get the option saying I drove them out, despite often having never gone to the farm in the first place. On top of all that, there are some UI issues with things like text being cut off in the text boxes, some grammar and misspelling issues and whatnot. Not huge deals. The studio is Polish, so maybe some of that is just translation issues, but it's there regardless. And there's my criticisms. Quite a bit, but that's okay. You know, nothing's perfect, and the game is in alpha at this point, so these issues will hopefully get cleaned up by the time it's released. All that said, from what I played of Erosion, I found it to be a very unique and innovative new title that adds a nice spin on the roguelite genre with its time jumping mechanic, as well as in integrating an open world to explore with quests and NPCs, rather than just a small hub you go delving dungeons from. The combat, although flawed, is still very fun and engaging. The art style and music are top-notch in my opinion, and although I don't think the playtest properly demonstrates the upgrade systems, it does show all the game has to offer in regard to itemization and weapon variety. So despite generally being a patient gamer, I wanted to take advantage of this opportunity and show you guys what Erosion is all about, because I think it's likely worth keeping on your radar if you like roguelites and open world adventures. Why not give it a slot on your wish list and keep up on the news, as the devs seem to be good with communication. Anyways, Erosion, ladies and gentlemen. Voxel open world dungeon delving roguelite. Fairly unique ride that I think is worth your attention. Check it out. Thanks for watching my humble little video. This has been Jarek Defiler, fighting the controls in Erosion. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to your fellow gamer here. You all have a good morning, afternoon, evening, or night, depending on where you are. And go boy some cow or something. Yeah, right now.